On.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and call us back to order. Make it official. Okay, so we're gonna do board reports. Should I start? You wanna go ahead? We'll just go around the table and then we can go online. Brian?
We can do that. And since I get to go first, I'm going to be the one to talk about our visit to Davenport. But you can all chime in. It was also a very cold day.
It was
Not quite
freezing
as
that
bad
day.
as this, though, but we visited 3 classrooms. We divided into 2 different groups. And so the group I was in, I think it was kindergarten, 1st grade and 2nd grade, or was it 1st, 2nd, and 3rd?
It was kindergarten.
I think it was kindergarten, yeah. And they were working on phonics, a new phonics program that was brand new to the district. And in fact, I think some of the teachers were still, you could tell they were still sort of on pins and needles about working with it. But it was interesting to watch how they handled it. And it was kind of fun to see how the different age groups of kids were responding to that kind of instruction. It was a beautiful elementary school that we were in. The teachers were really super engaged. You know, it's like any classroom, you saw some students who every question she asked, the hand went up, and then you had other kids who were like, you know, really struggling. But there was paras in 2 of the, maybe all 3 of the classrooms had at least had a couple of paraeducators working with them. And then later in the day, we met with a group of high school students that are in a leadership type of program. And that was very interesting. There were just great kids that were involved in that. All in all, it was a great experience. TJ was great at showing us around and being our host. And at the end of the day, we met with their school board, which was very interesting. They were not happy that we had not granted accreditation at the last meeting, but I think we had an opportunity to give them some positive strokes and also explain a bit why we had taken the action that we did. So.
Okay.
Nancy, Betty?
Well, I'm going to pass this newspaper around. It's from the middle of December, but it's from the local community. Council Bluffs is working with the Department of Ed on this early learning center. And I think the department or the state put in about $7 million. And the community has raised an additional $13 million. So they're going to build a new early learning center. And it will enable them to increase the number of preschoolers by at least 200.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I'll pass it around.
Cool.
You can look and read as much as you want.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very cool. Rod?
I have nothing to report this month.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, 1 second. I just put something wrong.
Sorry.
I think with the start of the legislative session, there's a lot of cool stuff that I get to do as a student. And this year more so than ever, I think that what's going on in the legislative session is going to impact students directly. And so that's a loop that IOSLI and the student groups I've been working with have been using to really engage students and young people across the state within the legislative session. And so we're trying to put out more resources of like how to use the legis.iowa.gov site, how to track the bills, how to get excused from class so that you can speak in a subcommittee meeting, because students often can't even voice their concerns about these topics because they're not able to attend the committee meetings, and they feel that oftentimes their written comments don't have as much power as actually showing up and speaking, because a lot of times the argument to automatically disvalue that student's opinion is that they're just props of their parents, things like that is something that happens a lot. So I'm really excited to see what our team can do in this legislative session for this upcoming year. We're planning our big rally event for the Iowa Student Learning Institute. So we bring students up to a building by the Capitol, teach them how to do an elevator pitch, how to get adult stakeholders engaged in the work that they're trying to do. Then they walk up to the Capitol and meet with their legislators at the end of the day. So I'm super excited about that. That's what I've been doing. Oh, and then I've also been working with a couple other organizations from different states. They partner with IOSLI to start student voice work within their own state and within their own areas, which is really cool and exciting.
I think you skipped Ryan.
I was gonna do you guys and then I know it's kind of weird because he's like sitting right there, but he doesn't know he's sitting right there, right?
Brian, you're on the giant screen.
You're on like the
Just you.
Jumbotron, you're like huge on this thing.
I feel bad for all of you.
It's like you're sitting at the head of the table though, so it's kind of cool because we're all like looking at you. That's why everyone's like, yeah, so.
I wish I didn't know that.
I'm sorry.
I too went on the Davenport visit and it was interesting. It was, what we saw was nice. On my comments, it was nice. What we saw though was just a small slice of their school district, which was encouraging to be there. So it was a good experience. I'm very glad that I went. I did sit on the office hours through NASB this last week. I don't know if you sat in on that.
Oh, yeah.
It was on the federal legislative priorities, and a lot of that was tied to the Build Back Better program ever passes with increased dollars for childcare and tuition forgiveness and daycare was the big three things there. Then I just started prep for a accreditation visit to North Carolina coming up. So
Oh, nice.
it's virtual, so I'll be
Oh, I was like, I hope it'll be warmer there.
at
Oh.
home in my tie and sweatpants.
That's hilarious.
Zoom attire, yes.
Yeah. Do those take a long time over Zoom? Because aren't they normally like a couple days? So like if you're doing it during Zoom,
This will be 4 days.
over Zoom?
It'll be a half a day on a Sunday and then 3 full days. Yeah.
Wow.
That's
There's
a
some
lot.
breaks in there, but yeah.
I don't know if I can
I'm
zoom.
not leading this one. I'm just one of the team members. So
Okay,
it's a county school district. So that'd be interesting.
very cool. Thank you. All right. Brian?
Yeah, thank you. So we've picking up on the comments earlier today about not only the educator shortage and the administrator shortage, both superintendents up our way are retiring this year. Dubuque Community School District and West Dubuque Community School District. I know there's searches underway. Stan Reingens and Rick Colpitz, and they're excellent. I've had the privilege of talking to them a few times. But Stan is going to, as I understand it, head Keystone AEA. So
Oh,
Wow.
we too up here, I think it was it, I can't remember which of you said there was some, was it John maybe that talked about early childhood grants your way? Between 2 and 3 million has been granted up our way to expand and remodel and improve some 3 or 4 early childhood centers. The largest early childhood provider up our way is Holy Family Catholic Schools, and the grants were obtained subject to some matches, which fortunately we're able to do. There'll be 200 or 300 more spots, and with an emphasis on second shift and with an emphasis on infants. The local Greater Dubuque Development has identified those as 2 priorities for business community. So it seems to be there's some merging of business and early childhood provider here that's just excellent. And lastly, I had an invitation to visit NICC last week, but there was a snow day. So I had a snow day. So it's been moved to next month, and I'll report on that next time.
Thank you. I guess I'll go. So I also went on a Davenport visit, and I thought it was a great visit. I'm really happy we were able to go. It was a really, really cool day. But the elementary school visit was awesome. I think it was the core program. Is that the name of the program that they're using? The core program, the one with the early literacy. I don't know why I got core. Okay, 95%, the one that they're using. It was really interesting to me because this is stuff that the nursery school, the Plymouth Nursery School where my son goes, that they're talking about doing, you know, with like phonetics and kind of learning like building blocks for reading. So I thought that that was really interesting to see that actually in the classroom. And the students seemed really engaged, so that was really awesome to see that. And then I loved meeting with the students. We actually got to sit at tables with the students, interact with them and talk to them about their experiences. So that was really neat. And then we got to meet with their local school board, which was an interesting exchange. So yeah, that was good though. I'm happy we were able to be there and to answer any questions they had. So I'm also on NASB's. We formed a Diversity and Equity Inclusion Committee, and I'm co-chairing that with and the exec from Washington, DC. So John Paul Hayward. And so we met yesterday and we are developing recommendations to be presented at the board meeting before the legislative conference. And the legislative conference is planned for March 27th. It's a Sunday through Tuesday. I think it's going to be in DC, but I feel like I'm waiting for things to come out. So hopefully in DC in person, but I'm not sure if they're going to switch to virtual after this latest week. So I will let you all know about that. Hopefully one or two of us can attend that in person if it is in person. So I think that's all. Right? Okay, so task force on growing a diverse K through 12 teacher base. Report, Larry.
I haven't been in here.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Hot seat.
Yeah, that is, yeah. Now you're right in front of Brian. Brian has no idea. That's why I said I don't want to Zoom. I mean, no offense, Brian, but.
I promise I'll be there next time.
Yeah, right.
This is how you do it, Ann. This is how you do it, yeah.
What size TV is that, like a 50 inch or so? It's probably like a 100 inch. What is that? I don't even know what that is. What is 95?
95.
You're on a 95 inch TV.
Enormous.
It's huge. I mean, it's like a movie theater.
I can't imagine how big my forehead must be.
You look great.
Oh, yeah. I have a great personality, yeah.
Task force on growing a diverse K-12 teacher base. I'll just give you a little bit of information. You have the report. I'll just take you through a few things with it, then I'll answer questions. If you look on page 3 of it, it'll show you who the members are. And pretty much every member made every meeting. It was very well attended group. The legislation identified positions basically, and then so Director Lebo, along with some folks from IJAG and some other folks, populated those positions with these names here. The executive summary is just that. It'll tell you basically what we were trying to get to. On page 6 is the actual language from House File 868 that established the task force. Page 7 is a summary of our meetings. We had 9 meetings. They were all virtual. We met about every other week. And this kind of gives you basically a summary. The first few meetings, we looked at data, looked at research. Next few meetings, we did a lot of brainstorming. In the next few meetings, we tried to figure out what do we want to synthesize this into. On page 8 are the recommendations from the task force. The first recommendation is studies, please.
I just want to, before you get into the recommendations, I had a couple
Sure.
of quick questions. Under the members, what's New Bow Company?
Nuvo Co.
Oh, I love them. I follow them.
What are they?
It's like, and I don't really know exactly what they do, but I know that they offer like courses in like entrepreneurship. So like being an entrepreneur within your own country, they offer entrepreneurship courses and they offer like computer science development courses for teachers and for students across the state. they do a lot of really cool work. It's a unique organization. Yeah.
And one other question, when you talk about people of color, are we talking about African Americans? Are we including Hispanic people? What does that
We
term mean?
actually, as a matter of fact, we struggled with terminology to try to get as inclusive as we could. And we basically, language that we landed on was identities, people with identities underrepresented in the teaching force. So that would include a lot of, I mean, it can include basically everybody except for white females in effect, because we have very few male elementary teachers. We have very few male teachers who are African-American. We have very few teachers in high schools that are low SES. So we're trying to be inclusive of anyone who is either A, underrepresented, or two, there's some barrier to them becoming a teacher.
So it's a very broad
Yes, sir.
definition.
Correct. That the idea being that any programming that comes out of this, we want it to be as inclusive as possible.
And one other question, under the actual legislation, I guess, that you listed on page 6, am I correct in saying that only one member of this task force was a teacher?
Only one member of this task force was a teacher, correct? There's a superintendent on the task force and some college faculty, but there was one member that was a teacher. There was a counselor identified, school counselor identified, and at the last minute, the person that we identified wasn't able to do it.
I was just surprised. I thought would be more teachers on this task force. That's why I was asking.
I think the point of the legislation was really to focus on apprenticeship model to develop teachers, and that's why you see New Boco, you see, Will Keeps on there from Starts Right Here, IJAG. A lot of these folks in here are heavy into alternative ways of bringing people into various professions.
Okay.
Were there any people of color on the workforce?
Yes, ma'am.
Task force?
Yes, ma'am.
What percentage?
27.9.
10.
And,
10.
10%.
oh, I was like 10 people? I was like, what?
No, there are 25 people on the task force, so I'm saying 10, maybe 20%.
So 2 or 3.
2 or 3. Yeah. Let's see. Let's just do this right.
Good math.
And we're going to do it. I don't want to give you bad information. So 2, 3. 4. 4 of the 25. Any other questions? I'll give you the recommendations. So first recommendation is to fund some studies. Do one study as to why people are leaving the teaching force. We have lots of anecdotal information. Anybody you talk to will tell you why people are leaving the task force, but we don't have any hard data on that. Some states have done studies, some have been successful and some have not. It's a difficult study to do. And another study we would like to do, the task force would like to do, is why do people choose to not become teachers? Why do they choose away from teaching? So interviewing, surveying high school students, surveying college students. Why is it that, if you are choosing a profession, not necessarily why you're choosing that, but if you are not choosing teaching, why would you not choose teaching? Okay. So those studies the task force would like to see those happen. The second one is to look at ways to look at the program completion test. Right now, to complete a teacher ed program, you have to pass a test. And so the task force said, hey, let's look at that. And I will tell you that there's a bill in the Capitol that's looking at that exact same thing.
Is this, I'll just use the phrase.
It's the practice.
Coming down qualifications that we expect in a prospective teacher?
Not exactly. The qualifications or the requirements on programs are that they use multiple measures to determine if a person is ready to become a teacher. They focus on student teaching evaluations. They focus on coursework evaluations, content, the content knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. What this does is this test, 95% of test takers every year in Iowa pass it. It's a test of either a test of knowledge or content knowledge and a test of pedagogical knowledge, or it's performance assessment that puts both of those together. And the idea being that if the test is removed, then the colleges, universities would still have their requirement to evaluate that student, student teacher, that teacher candidate, to see if that person is there, but the state mandated test would not be a part of that.
Is there like because I know with the bar exam, let's say, you know, a lot of students who don't pass the bar exam, you know, there's a high rate if you are Black and you're, you know, a male, then your rate of not passing the bar exam is higher than a white male student, right? That's just the way it is. You know, these are exams. I think that there's, you know, people say maybe these are exams that are written by, you know, white people or whatever they're not, but you know, so I think that if you don't have the contextual knowledge and stuff like that, it doesn't mean that these Black males would be a worse lawyer. It just means that they can't they can't pass that final hurdle, right? And then they're in debt, all of this or whatever. So I think sometimes people talk about moving those barriers and then maybe testing their knowledge in other ways and things like that, just to kind of, it doesn't mean that, you know, so I think that I wouldn't say it's like dumbing it down. Maybe it's just looking at alternative pathways of getting that person into the teaching field, because maybe this one is a barrier and it has a disparate impact.
And I will say the demographics of this test mirror what you're talking about for the bar exam.
I would say probably for standardized tests in general, but I mean.
In our schools, the people who have access in the economic funds to study for the test and pay people to help them study
Exactly.
much higher on them, and who have access
Yeah.
to advanced placement courses, which often
Tutors and Kaplan, which costs $3,000, and you know, like those things all cost money. And those are choices that those people have to make, you know.
So there is a House bill. Actually, there are actually 3 House bills that are looking at various ways of addressing this. And one of them is just doing away with the testing component altogether, which came into play, by the way, in 2012. The third one I'm going to come back to. The fourth one is help develop and support partnerships between P12 schools and institutions of higher education. These things are just going gangbusters everywhere. We had 6 institutions of higher ed on the task force. They've all instituted a partnership with either a P12 school and or a community college. University of Dubuque has one in a couple different cities. BVU has one, University of Iowa has one, UNI has one. There are a number of college universities that are developing these partnerships, and we've compiled a list for Director Lebo, so she can go see them. The last one is reducing financial barriers for candidates to complete a program. You know, the teachers, the average salary for getting teachers is 42 grand. So their ability to pay off student loans isn't strong when they first start. Excuse me. So there's people that are looking at different ways. One of the ways, and again, this is getting some traction across the parking lot, is how can we pay student teachers? So that way, you know, you don't have to quit your job. If you're working part-time, you don't have to quit the student teach. So there's some traction in looking at that as well.
This will date me a lot, but back in the 1960s, the federal government, I believe, offered loan forgiveness, offered to forgive the student loans if they taught in certain subject areas and if they agreed to teach for X number of years. I think that worked very well back then, but you didn't discuss that at all this time in terms of the state creating a program that might do that?
That program exists. It's the Teach Iowa Scholars Program, gives a student or a teacher, if you'll teach in a shortage area, it gives you $4,000 a year for 5 years. It's run through the Iowa College Student Aid Commission. It's funded at $400,000 a year. There's, again, that's getting some action over there. They're trying to change the way that money is awarded, rather than in shortage areas to award it basically to any teacher, but to make sure that half of the money goes to teachers who will teach in a small district, half goes to teachers that'll teach in a district that's above a certain size.
I would suggest $20,000 pays for 1 year of school. And if you're
Just barely.
just barely,
If you go to a state.
if you go to
Go to any other school.
university, and we're looking for teachers to obviously have a bachelor's degree and in some cases a master's degree. So there was no real discussion of
There is.
boosting that program significantly.
There are people that are asking, people from different organizations are asking legislators to boost that program to at least $2 million a year from the current $400,000.
But would they change the amount that
Change each, and one of the options is to change the amount from $4,000 to $7,500 a person per year.
So
So-
you forgive $7,500 of your loan a year?
You get $7,500, period.
Oh,
So
it's not loan forgiveness.
it's not loan forgiveness.
Sorry.
So that way you can use it to pay your.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay.
Or if you're just somebody that didn't happen to have a loan, you can use it to augment your salary, you know.
Okay,
whatever.
okay.
So it's not a loan forgiveness. Now, there are federal loan forgiveness.
Yeah, the program,
programs
yeah,
as well, teach grants and things like that. And those are tied to shortage areas that we determine for the USDE.
Can someone do both?
Absolutely.
do we make that information
That's what I was.
readily available to students who might be considering a teaching profession? And do they know that these funds are available and they go out and get in debt and then it's too late?
We do at the college level. So the students who are in teacher ed programs, this is one of the drawbacks here. People who are in teacher ed programs know very well about these, because there are some of the federal programs are, you can get money while you're in college. So financial aid, especially at privates, they're looking for anything they possibly can, privates and publics. So yes, people who are in the programs know about these, all of these, and apply for everything they possibly can. People who are not necessarily considering become a teacher, high school students, junior college students, we are not doing a good enough job of making them aware. Absolutely not.
My other thing that I think is pretty important is so these, I think that with the workforce development programs that have been implemented in high school, students are getting paid to do internships. So I secured an internship to do over the summer in an area like tech or finance. Mine is in tech. I'm able to make money, almost $10,000 over the summer just for working for them. But the internships that students would be able to take within education are usually not paid. And so I think that when you're trying to do these workforce development things within high schools, like students are getting paid to do their jobs and to do these internships. And they're being told that in these industries, you should never take an internship that isn't paid. And so I think that when students don't have access to these opportunities and they have to pick between going into a paid internship or non-paid internship, they'll have a lot more influence of going into that paid one, which will influence their career outcomes a lot more than one that isn't paid.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big issue too.
And that's a great segue into the major recommendation of the task force, which is registered apprenticeships. The task force recommended a model of taking high school students, putting them in a registered apprenticeship, identifying high school students with the emphasis being on identifying high school students who come from underrepresented populations and teaching, putting them into a registered apprenticeship, which does a couple of things. It starts them in high school. They can work as a paid intern, as a teacher's aide. So they're paid by the school district, and they're going to be a teacher's aide, during part of the day or part of the week or whatever in a school somewhere there. And then the rest of the time, of course, they're going to school. There's an emphasis on dual credit. So the partnership includes community college. So that high school can work with community college, try to get that high school student as much college credit as possible. And then that registered apprenticeship continues on beyond high school to help that person work as, first of all, the person can work as a para educator in the school district and can work full-time as para educator. So again, be paid. And there's support for them going to college. The idea being that that first part of that pathway gets them to a high school diploma, gets them to a paraeducator certificate, and gets them to an associate's degree. Okay, and then the second half of the pathway is where a paraeducator enters the pathway. So if a person did the high school to paraeducator, they finish that, they go into the next part, or an existing paraeducator just goes right into this part. Paraeducator goes in, does a registered apprenticeship, is working as a paraeducator for the school district and has support to go to college. The idea here is, the difference here is it's going to be one of our ed prep institutions. And what they'll do is that registered apprenticeship hours are overseen. They're the registered apprenticeship, they're employee of the school district, but the hours are managed and overseen. That work is managed and overseen by the college university as well. And so the registered apprenticeship can account for the required clinical practice in a college university prep program, including student teaching. So that's a way that we can pay a student teacher, because they can work as a para. They can't work as a sub while they're student teaching, but they can work as a para for the district as long as the college university is intimately involved in that program. And so the person doesn't ever have to quit a job in order to complete a teacher ed program. That's the registered apprenticeship model. We were going to recommend to the legislature that they give us some money to run that. And then Director Lebo and Deputy Director Williamson came up with $9 million in ESSER money. So we're starting that up. Iowa Workforce Development is going to manage the process of it. We're going to help things get set up for it. So it's pretty cool.
When you're setting the amounts that students would be getting for these internships or apprenticeships, I'd be aware of the other opportunities that are available in the area. I know that at my school, there are some opportunities for high schoolers to get paid to work within the schools, but they're like minimum wage, and students can spend their times in their free class periods that they have working at Target, making $15 to $18 an hour. And so I think that just be aware, because students are thinking about money right now, especially if they're preparing to go to college, or they're considering if they're able to, like, that's what's on the top of students' minds.
So the way we figured the money is that a paraeducator is paid about $12 an hour. So as a student aide and as a paraeducator, that person's going to be paid about $12 an hour. It may not keep them from going to Walmart, but it may, because they're going to get fairly close. The ESSER support will pay the district for all of that $12 an hour while that person's working as an aide as a high school student. And then half of that salary is a para, because they're already paying paras. For the para to teacher model, the grant money will pay for half of that salary, so that the school district plugs in half, the grant plugs in half, and then the grant plugs in tuition. So we figured tuition at community college tuition for a year for the to get a para, and then we figured at 16 grand a year, which is Regents full tuition, which nobody pays, but that's 16 grand a year. And so the Regents can discount that. Privates, to get this, would discount, if they can discount to 16 grand, then which they can, then they can take this money in just as well.
You go back over, you alluded to having teachers being paid for during their student teaching times. You brought that up.
Yes, sir.
Or did I imagine that?
Nope, I did.
Okay, because that was on my list to ask you about, because it seems like, as it's what been alluded to earlier, is that if somebody's in college and they go out on an internship or student teaching, there's a difference of of pay, and sometimes that gets equated to value. So you go student teaching, now you know, you have to give up your part-time job, but you're also paying your tuition to the university.
Correct.
The opportunity to do an apprenticeship.
Correct.
So I'm glad that's part of your.
And that's a part of this is to figure out a way. The only student loan I ever got was to student teach. Because I was an adult and I had to pay my bills. This is so a central tenet of this is that a person does not have to quit a job to student teach.
Do you talk at all about first generation college students? When you're talking about people of underrepresented populations, my guess is that a lot of those high school students would be a first generation college student, so they don't have the model, the role model, the example, the support, the encouragement that other students, you know, like Hannah probably has.
That was talked about. It's not specifically addressed here, but I will say that at least 3 of our universities, their mission is to do that, is to take in, to recruit and support first generation college students. So at least there's some of that going on, but it wasn't specifically addressed as we'll do this to meet that need in the task force.
Did you? I mean, has there ever been any talk about cohorts? So again, I'm from Marshalltown, so your Hispanic students goes to UNI is the only one in the class. And a cohort, you know, makes studying together.
Right.
Is that?
So this pilot actually requires a cohort model, cohort of at least 10. So a school district has to have 10 people, or, you know, whether it's high school students or paras, they have to have 10. Part of that is financial because colleges and universities won't run a course for fewer than 10 people. So if you have a cohort of 10, then we can make the college university come to the students, and they'll run that. And yes, a cohort model does absolutely provide that support. Now, the next question that you'll ask is, what about a small district that can't put a cohort of 10 together? There's partnerships. So coursework can be online. So neighboring districts can partner to get a cohort of 10. Or if we have coursework online, they don't even have to be neighboring. But the cohort of 10 is a basic requirement. But small districts are going to be encouraged, or large districts, it doesn't matter. Districts are going to be encouraged to partner to work together on this.
This is a bit off topic, but speaking of like online rural districts doing online courses and able to come together for that, statewide, does every high school have access to laptops? Because I know that within DMPS they don't, and I think that having individual laptops or Chromebooks or connection to internet access for each student is going to be super important. So I just didn't know if there was plans for that at all related to that, because that's where students access the majority of their information.
We don't track that. I would say after COVID, the majority did because they had to offer that opportunity. A lot of them spent their funds on buying equipment, but I don't believe we would have a record of how many that they have.
Many decades ago, there used to be an organization, Betty, you remember this maybe? FTA, Future Teachers of America. And I know it's has been in existence for decades since, but the thought is that if you could get some type of an organization where kids can belong to down the road, it's just a thought that it may have some merit to revive something or something like that, where they can make a connection with others who have a similar interest.
There is a organization like that. I forget the name. It's not a recognized career and technical student organization, but it's in that same vein. For the name. It's out there. It's all popular.
Probably not. Nobody can name it.
But they're working.
They're working on it. That's good.
Sure.
Is there any concern in your group that if you are able to develop in these, as you say, in your final 2 years, this apprenticeship, they become teachers' aides. Is there any concern that teachers in the system are going to be overwhelmed? So if they're working with teachers' aides that are in the high school, then they're unwilling to take teachers as when they're doing their practice teaching. I mean, are you overwhelming with additional responsibilities teachers within the system?
It's a fair point. The pre-student teaching practicum put little requirement on the classroom teacher, other than, bring them in your classroom, let them, do some work with you and make sure they, that they're doing what you want them to do. There's no supervisory, there's no evaluative piece to those. So we don't get much pushback from teachers that that's a burden. Student teaching, can be seen a different way because, it's much more evaluative, but I pretty sure, I think I can say all of our college universities pay a stipend to those cooperating teachers who take a student teacher. Some will pay a stipend to a person who will take a pre-student teaching, but not all. And a lot of people look at it as, hey, there's 2 more adults in the room that can help me in the number of adults to students here. So there's different ways that people look at that.
I heard that students are having a hard time finding student teacher placements because teachers didn't want them.
There's
The added burden.
there are some teachers that will consider student teaching a burden and don't want to take, which is a bit ironic because they were in somebody's classroom at one time. But the other piece of that is during COVID, it's very, very difficult to find placements just because nobody wants you in their building. But we seem to not, overall, there are some issues where people don't want to take student teachers, but it's not widespread. Amanda.
Kind of a follow-up on John's comment. There's a statement in here, students less than 16 years old may start this program. It seems to me that we should be at least looking at students younger than 16. It's kind of like the example that we have with the CTE, and that is when you're a senior in high school, you don't suddenly decide you want to be a welder. There has to be something that gives you foundation for that. I don't know that teaching is actually part of CTE, but it's career and technical education. Is there any way to, or is it advisable to, in 6th and 7th grade, when we're supposed to be introducing students to career and technical education, that teaching as a profession can be included? So you can't wait, I think, until a kid is a senior in high school and he says, oh, I want to be a teacher.
Right.
You got to have some background on that. And I'm not sure we're really good at building that background for kids who may really enjoy teaching.
We're not. And that was a large discussion piece in the task force because we talked about going to 5th grade and like teacher clubs, things like that to bring students together and introduce them to what teaching looks like in 5th grade and move it on through. So that was very well discussed. It didn't make a final cut, but one of the things that was also a part of that was graduates of this program who become teachers. The idea is to encourage them, say, okay, look, we've supported you through all this program. Now, when you go back and get this teaching job, we need you to recruit and bring people back through this. So to have a cyclical recruitment strategy, if you will. But yes, we talked about doing from 5th grade up, encouraging students to become teachers, but we just didn't have, basically we ran out of time and didn't have a way to make that a mechanism.
I mean, imagine like what that could look like. That would be, I mean, students would start to get that training a little bit and they'd start to be able to teach each other almost like you
Yeah.
could do that within classrooms. I think one of the biggest things for me that got me engaged with my education was looking at how I could meet the competencies and standards in different ways than I was able to in the classroom. And I think that that could have a huge impact as far as engagement goes within the classroom too.
Absolutely.
So I think, yeah, the CTE program right now might value more careers more so than others.
Absolutely.
And one last comment, maybe it's sort of been covered by that, but so the paid job component for registered apprenticeships will be paid by the school districts at a 2.5% increase that's being proposed. Is that realistic long-term for school districts to absorb that cost?
Well, and right now the funding is coming from the pilot program. So I think the question would be beyond that. What does the impact actually look like?
Right.
One of the benefits of doing the pilot is all the things you're going to learn throughout the process. And I think that's going to have to be one of the things we determine. Does this eventually evolve into something that's funded long-term? Even though the idea is to scale it, but I think those are all still kind of up in the air.
And that, exactly, this is a pilot, so we're going to learn those things. We know already that if we were going to pay student teachers, right now, it costs $20 million a year.
Mhm.
If we paid them at subpay. So we're going to learn a lot of that and what are the costs and what would it take to make those things?
And how long is this pilot supposed to run?
2 to 3 years. The high school to para pathway is a 3-year pathway. And then the other pathway, if a person comes into it with an associate's degree as a para, then that person, the plan is that person completes in 2 years. Everything can slip. You know, people have lives and that could slip to 3 years.
So in 2-3 years, what I guess is the expectation?
100 in 2 to 3 years, the funding, if everything works the way it should, we would get 100 new paras and 100 new teachers through this model.
And are you expecting it? Because I think one of the things was that to diversify it. So are you expecting that to be a more diverse?
Yes. Now,
Like how diverse then?
well, as diverse as possible. This is going to be a competitive grant. And one of the components, and I don't have that part in front of me, I think it's about 20% of it is around the diversity of your participants. So, so yes, you know, if you have a more diverse group, you have a much more likely chance of getting the grant.
Just an editorial note about the cost. You know, throw out the figure of $20 million, what it would cost to pay student teachers. Sometimes you have to look at it, what's it going to cost if we don't do that?
Right.
And so just a thought.
Was there much discussion on, I don't know, I think 3 years, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And then by the 4th year, I don't really mean this, but you've wasted 4 years of trying to solve a problem that we have now. Was there any discussion of some things we could do in a year that would help alleviate some of the problems that we're having with teacher shortages?
That really wasn't, that wasn't the function of this group.
All right.
This group was to recruit people who are not in represented populations teaching force into becoming teachers. So it wasn't our task.
Thank you.
There's a lot of people talking about it, but it wasn't our task.
I think this is a really good start.
It's a start.
It's a good start. A lot of thought went into it and appreciate it.
Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah.
Thank you, Larry.
The condition of education. Okay.
Hello.
So
Hopefully David has added me as a panelist here, so I can actually share my screen. Okay, cool. So I've got about the next hour. I'll try not to kill you with statistics over that, but it's hard for me to promise that. I'm going to be presenting on two different pieces. The annual condition of education report and the Iowa School performance profiles. So I'm going to start with the condition of ed. It was an extremely busy December where we launched both of these. So condition of ed is around 300 pages, 275 full of statistics. So you can imagine the amount of work that kind of goes into that, from early childhood to post-secondary enrollment, finance data, et cetera. So in 30 minutes, I can only give you a sliver of all that good information. And then on the performance profile site, we received, I think it was 43,000 hits in December on that site alone. So it's got to be up there in terms of traffic. And the site was down for a week because we were providing schools a preview of the results. So 42,000 people is pretty big for Department of Ed. So a lot of visibility, high profile release. So this is our 32, so going back to the condition of ed, this is our 32nd version of this report. So I'm just going to touch on, again, just a few pieces, schools, what are the sort of makeup of school enrollment, school size, demographic updates in terms of who's enrolled, free reduced price lunch, a little bit about educator information. I know there's been a fair amount of discussion today about teacher retention. So what do those numbers sort of look like? Curriculum patterns, and then just a quick preview of the online version of the condition of ed. So I tend to move quickly, so please stop me and ask questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you're talking about like demographics and things, I know that I feel like I don't know if it was preliminary census data or census data came out. Does that factor in at all, or is that stuff you guys already had access to? Like you guys already knew that, or so census data in terms of demographics and household data and stuff like that? I don't know if that factors at all into this. It's more students based.
So we don't use census data for the purposes of the condition of ed report. I mean, certainly it's something that we look at and, is obviously a really good source for us, but a lot of the information comes directly from schools and during their registration process, what is your income, what's your race, ethnicity, those kinds of pieces of data. But I will talk briefly about some census trends too.
Okay, and then with the pandemic, were the responses still, because I mean, were some students like absent or didn't register, or with online school, I mean, was there like a lag or gaps of data or anything like that, or everything was okay with the pandemic?
Certainly not everything was okay with the pandemic. Enrollment, and there will, throughout this next hour, there'll be a lot to sort of highlight some of the differences that we've seen. But just in terms of overall enrollment, we did see a really sizable drop between fall of 19 and fall of 20, as you would expect with all the uncertainty. So we had seen just historically about 17 years of decline, followed by 10 years of continued increases, right? Slow but steady. And then basically all of that was erased with last year. And there was a drop of about 6,500 students between fall of 19 and fall of 20. When we fast forward to fall of 21, only about a third of those students actually came back. So we're below where we were roughly 5 years ago.
What does that mean? Where did they go?
That's a great question, because we only saw.
Like, do we know, like, did they move out of the state, or like, do we know that, or?
We don't. So I think it's a mix, right? I think there's some folks that left the state. I do think that some went to independent private instruction, or some, we did see an increase in homeschool assistance enrollment, particularly in fall of 20. That did go down in fall of 21 when there was more certainty in terms of enrollment, but it's still above where it was in 2019. So I think it's a mix of homeschool, people leaving, and typically, the declines were in the earlier grades, kindergarten, that kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
So more parents willing to have their kids sort of sit out a year, hoping that things would sort of come back to normal.
I was one of those parents.
Exactly.
We did pre-K plus instead of kindergarten this
That's your
year.
own question.
Yeah, right?
So the first piece is just, who's attending Iowa Public Schools. And what's in the condition of ed, and we have newer data, but I'm just going to focus on what's in the report. When we released this in November, we hadn't yet processed fall of 21. So this solely focuses on, basically a 21-year window from 2021 school year to the 2021 school year. So you can see here, obviously, the large increase in minority student enrollment, almost 400% over that 21-year period. And now, roughly 26% of students in an Iowa school is a student of color. Just to give you some sense, Brooke, back to your point, when we look at census data and we look at those that are, school-aged kids, the tipping point for sort of what's called a majority minority enrollment. So in other words, more students of color enrolled nationally in public schools than white students. That actually happened in 2021. So you can see that Iowa certainly lagged in that regard, but we're seeing about just under a 1 percentage point change per year, about 0.7, and that sort of accelerated. There's 10 school districts in Iowa that are majority minority. So just to give you a sense of the 327 school districts. So roughly 9%.
I think when we were at Davenport, I think TJ said that they're about 5 years from that, maybe.
Yeah.
He said in 5 years, they'd be a majority minority school district.
So, things, I know Larry was just here talking about, the recommendations from task force, and you guys were just talking about diversifying the workforce, right? When your student population is so far away from the percent of minority educators in the state, something needs to happen there to sort of, it's going to take time, certainly.
Yeah.
But schools will continue to become more diverse. And so how do we push the workforce as well? So this gives you a sense, there's a lot in this particular slide. I'm just going to come over here so I'm not pointing at the air. So we have, so this is again that 21-year window. You've got the percent of districts that are in each of these enrollment categories. So a district that has less than 300 students versus a district that has 7,500 or more.
Wow.
And you can see that, 54% of students in the state of Iowa, roughly 500,000, are being educated by 11% of districts.
Oh.
The other thing that I'll highlight too, and when you look at just the district changes, so you can see that it's sort of pulling from the middle, right? This middle tier, 600 to 1,000 kids is decreasing while everybody else is slightly increasing. And then kind of going over to the right-hand side, which is like who's being served, the count of kids in each of these district types. I think the notable piece here too are these declines, right? So this middle tier is actually losing percentage-wise more students. So more kids going to smaller districts and more kids going to larger districts. So that middle are losing students, as well as the middle are seeing fewer districts in that enrollment sort of area. Questions? It's a lot on a chart.
Okay, so 2020, 2021, and then that second to last one is the percent of change increase or the second to last one?
This is the increase and decrease in these percent of kids.
Okay.
So from 132,000 to 161 is a 22%
Oh, okay.
point increase. And this is just a percent of students. If that makes sense.
Percent of all students.
Yep. So 161 is roughly, 33% of 480,000.
And that's K through 12 enrollment, right? Okay, I was like, I don't know, grades, I have 7,500 plus kids.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm surprised that the smaller ones are also increasing.
seeing increases.
That's surprising to me.
I mean, we see it across the state, just in the enrollment, right? So, with consolidation, certainly you're seeing fewer districts overall covering a wider geographic area. But there is sort of a point at which, and there's a law, right? Like you can only spend so long on a bus, in terms of kids attending that particular district. The next thing, this is actually a new piece in the report, and just wanted to sort of point out, again, you've got roughly an 11-year window from 2010-11 to 2021. And what this shows really not only are the minority student enrollments, but what percent of students are free or reduced price lunch as well. So just to highlight, 81% of Black or African-American students in the state are also free or reduced price lunch. So that's a pretty high number. And then Hispanic students at 72% versus 32% of white students that are also eligible for free or reduced price lunch. I tried to take a look, actually, there's no national data point that I could find that provides this. There's something close, census has it, but the way that they calculate poverty is a much higher bar than free reduced price lunch. So at any rate, there are no national comparisons to know, is Iowa up or down in this particular area?
Oh, okay. What's free? So what would be the threshold for free and reduced lunch?
So census sets the poverty level, and then free reduced price lunch is, I wish Kayla were here, it's like 180% of that poverty level.
Oh, okay.
Is the free lunch, and then 135% of that poverty level is reduced price lunch.
Okay. Do a lot
So it's
of,
about, I want to say it's like 40,000 per year for a family of 4.
okay.
So this is a new piece of data that we put in the COE this year that I thought was pretty interesting. Next, sort of moving on, a lot of discussion around the educators. This is actually the same line. This alternative axis sort of zooms in and blows this up, if you will. But if you look at it from 0 to 40,000, you can see a much, sort of flatter but upward trend. But zooming in, you can see there's a pretty substantial increase in the number of educators in Iowa schools over this, 14-year window. Teacher leadership and compensation had a lot to do with this, right? $250 million, whether that's a new teacher leader role or, a replacement teacher because somebody's pulled out of a classroom. Either way, it adds to the numbers. And just to be clear, our fall 21 data is preliminary. In taking a look at it, we do see about 100 fewer educators than what we saw in fall of 20, but it's not this dramatic drop that we're hearing across the state. And not to say that that's not real, but when we look at what districts have told us in terms of the number of educators, it's not this, 500 drop, right? It's roughly 100 educators statewide. Larry's program that he mentioned after 3 years potentially could, help with this. But just wanted to give you a sense of what that trend has looked like. And then certainly once we have the final numbers in fall, we'll provide that info too. So again, this is similar data, but just wanted to give you a sense. So we've got teachers at the top. This is what's called support and related services, counselors, those other individuals in the building. And then lastly, administrators. So overall 12% increase in the number of teachers, 19% increase in those that are helping in the building, whether they're a counselor, et cetera. And then about a 7.5% increase overall of total administrators over roughly a decade. So more people, period, right? Not just teachers, but also other kinds of positions within districts.
Can I ask a quick question on that? So does that also include counselors?
Yes, they'd be under this 18% increase in the support and related services category. But there's a whole bunch of different job titles. So I can't say by looking at this that those are counselors.
You just don't, okay,
Could be a curriculum person, that kind of thing.
thanks.
Sure. So then also, so what does it look like from a salary perspective, right? And so at the top, you see average administrator cost or salary, followed by that support salary, and then lastly, educator salary. So this represents the percent gain in or increase rather in their average salary. And then the bottom is sort of a year to year. So in other words, teachers in 2013 had a 1.4% increase in their salary from the prior year. 3% in that same year for administrators. So you can see sort of, when people get their raises, what did I get? Did I get 4%? Did I get 3%? This also shows you that in most years, administrators got a higher gain in salary compared to teachers. Now, if I were to put a chart up here, what does this all cost, right? I think, Mike, you mentioned earlier, what's the year-to-year gain, the state supplemental support or the allowable growth, right? Does that sort of keep up with the increase in the number of bodies that you have in the buildings, as well as your cost for that average individual in the building? It's a really good question. When you're increasing both your cost and the number, there's a point at which your budget can only handle so much.
Well, the $1,000 retention for the teachers have an impact on that, because then their salary will be increased by, no?
It's a one-time payment. I don't think it'll be, are you asking it won't be
part of the
factored into the salary
schedule.
schedule?
Oh, okay.
It will be reported as an average salary for that 1 year, but then there's no sustainable money to do it next year.
Okay. So it's not like their salary was increased by that. It's just that they just got like a bonus kind of thing. Okay. Interesting.
So next, this is the NEA data, National Education Association data. So just to be clear, this isn't data that we have, but we look at it, right? Like, how is Iowa competitive compared to the Midwest, compared nationally in terms of teacher salaries overall? So, 23rd in 18-19, which is the most current data that NEA has, and then, going down slightly, but still in the upper half. So I think, the dollars go a lot further in Iowa compared to perhaps Illinois, closer to Chicago, et cetera. So, still in the upper half in terms of the amount of money that's paid to teachers.
I have a question. Do you know how that compares to like 5 or 10 years ago from a ranking perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of a funny story. I mean, when I started, one of the first jobs that I did, and this is a few years ago, I won't say how many, that was when they were talking about the teacher salary supplement amount, right? So it was 250 million at the time, was a line item. It's now been rolled into the formula. But my first thing they said was, if we put 250 million in, how many years before we get above into the top half in terms of teacher salary? And at that point, and this was, 15 years ago, we were in the lower half. And so with that sort of $250 million invested every year, and it keeps growing with the allowable growth or state supplemental aid amount, we've maintained in that upper half. But it took about 7 years in order to get there. Then they added TLC. TLC has really helped sort of maintain our ability to be in the upper half.
Thank you.
Sure. How am I doing on time? So I've just got a couple more slides and then I'll switch over to performance profiles. Just information that we look at in terms of sort of key coursework. So this is the class of 2021. So how many students throughout their high school career took Algebra 2 versus Trig versus Chemistry versus Physics, et cetera. And then, you can see sort of the year-to-year differences, how that compares with 6 years ago, and then how that compares with roughly 11 years ago in terms of the percent of teachers. So you can see some pretty big increases, which is great over that long term, but it's sort of mixed year to year. I mean, most students, we did see an increase in Algebra 2 this last year, Trig, but some of the other areas went down slightly. World language went up. I didn't know you could get out of high school without taking physics, right? Like that might have been an option. I'm just kidding. But at any rate, it's about 32%.
Why are trig and calculus listed as the same one? I feel like it's like in my grade, our trig requirements are combined with another class that's required, and calculus is an optional class.
So we go off of this actually encompasses statistics as well, higher level math, but I just wanted to be clear, it's trig or calculus. That's a local decision in terms of if they want to package that into a course. In our sort of, we use a national standard coding system, and in that trig and calculus are separate.
Okay.
So it includes more than just trig or calculus, but the idea is that, it's beyond, Algebra 2.
Jay, David Canaday,
Yeah.
we love to see you back on camera again. Can you start using the big board?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, yay.
Sure.
I can.
I would have been pointing at Brian otherwise.
Oh, poor Brian. I didn't want that.
But I do appreciate you.
Poster boy for the
So,
state.
all right. So this is, you're going to see the next couple, some changes due to COVID. So this is concurrent enrollment courses. Obviously there's a huge upward trend, but more recently we have seen some declines, and I think that is directly related to folks, ability to sort of access those courses. So we expect that to go up. I think this is just a blip. So 101,000 courses taken during the 2021 school year. That person, could be a student, in any grade 9 through 12, which happens to be 44,000 kids. Last piece I just want to point out is we don't have all of the book on this particular website. So we have an online condition of education report, And the intent there is really to sort of bring the static book alive so that you could log in and take a look at enrollment trends for the state or Des Moines or whatever community you wanted to look at. Things like the course taking information. So what percent of students in Ames took higher level math is something you could look at. So we're going to continue to add to this. Right now, we just have these 4 sections, but over the years, we'll add more.
Is this available to the public, or do you have, like, can you just go on the webpage and just access it?
Anyone can access it. And actually, we're getting ready to put another version out there where you can download all the data that it shows you. So if you're, like me, you really like that, the spreadsheet of all data, that will be available in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
So not only will you get it interactively, but if you wanted to do your own analysis, then you are able to do that too. Okay, so I'll try to be brief on performance profiles. Should I just go to the site here? So this is the performance profiles website. There's a state level version, there's a district level version, and then a school level version. This is the state page. The learning measures are measures that sort of count. So every school gets a rating, and those ratings this year kind of don't count from a federal accountability perspective. We received a waiver because of the uncertainty from the 2021 school year. We weren't really sure how many kids would be able to take a test. And we also weren't sure what those results were going to look like. So we put up the website so anyone can take a look at all of the information. But from a federal accountability perspective, there's no sort of negative consequence because of that. So it's got information such as, graduation rates, the percent of students that are growing, how many kids did participate in the assessment. Then we've got other data points, things like staff retention. So if you wanted to take a look at the percent of educators in a particular school that were retained year to year, that's really good data. You can take a look at post-secondary enrollment. So the percent of students that enrolled in college a year after completing high school, chronic absenteeism. So point is there's a lot of really good information. So I'll just give you a quick summary of some of the things that we found when taking a look at the website. So I just mentioned, we weren't really sure what spring 21 assessment administration would look like. We were pleasantly surprised to see that in a typical year, 99% of kids take a test, right? We weren't sure how many would, but because so many schools were in person, and we did actually provide a remote test option that about 3% of students took advantage of, we were actually able to hit 98%, which I don't have the final national numbers. I'd be really surprised if I was not at the top. So that's great, right? Even if learning was very disrupted for some during the school year, at least for almost every kid, we know what that looks like in aggregate. We know what it looks like at that school, and we know what it looks like for that student. So I think that was super encouraging, and something that schools should be really, really proud of. At the same time, there were some pretty significant shifts in performance. So English language arts, so it's reading and there's a writing piece. There were sort of basically about half the grades went up and half of them went down. The most notable decrease or decline was in third grade English language arts. At the same time, in math, almost every grade level went down overall. So in March, we released the Closing the Achievement Gaps report. So, you know, when I come back in March, or maybe it'll be April, we can go a lot further into what does that look like for different groups of students. When we take a look at so the performance profiles does have a score for every school. And, you know, that basically sort of crosses this continuum, with the lowest being what's considered a priority or comprehensive school on one end of the continuum, and then exceptional schools on the upper, the highest performance. So you can see that, sorry. Commendable was the largest gainer. So that commendable category, acceptable decreased the most, and then needs improvement also saw increases. So that can be sort of reflected here. So the first year we launched, which was 2018, we had about 53% of schools in that upper half. It decreased in 19, and then in 21, it went up slightly. So this just gives you the percent of schools in each of the rating categories overall. But sort of a slight upward shift. I'll skip that. There's a lot of data on this particular slide. So again, looking at these different enrollment categories, the number of districts that are in each size category, and then some demographic information to take a look at. So as an example, in the districts with 7,500 or more, over 52% of students in that district were eligible for free reduced price lunch. You get a sense of minority student enrollment. The last piece that I think is important here is this stat called an effect size. So an effect size is basically a stat that goes from, basically -1 to 1. And the higher you get to closer to 1, the more meaningful that effect is. So you can see that there was sort of a negative effect. So when we're taking a look at the mean or average score year to year, so this is 19, you can see that declined on average 3 points, which is a lot in our rating system. So the biggest effect was in terms of overall scores was really on this, the largest districts. So people love scatter plots. This is kind of hard to see. The bottom is also provides that same information. I guess the big takeaway is that, so what you have here is math proficiency, and then the change in proficiency year to year. So you can see that the average change was a 5 percentage point drop in proficiency. So if they were at, let's say 80% as an average, they would have dropped down to 75. But then you also see a decrease in the average proficiency rate overall. So this is fairly meaningful, right? And then when you take a look at, so we created quadrants. So this would be considered, so they had below average performance and below average increases. And so this sort of low quadrant is not good, and the right upper quadrant is good, if you will. And so when you take a look at the percent of, the characteristics of these particular districts, you can see that particularly in math, as an example, much higher percent free reduced price lunch, and tends to be a higher minority district just overall. So the big takeaway here is that when we take a look at the performance profiles, more districts with more economic diversity and just more, race and ethnic diversity saw larger decreases in their overall scores. And this last one, basically you've got 2019 at the top, 2021 at the bottom, and it's a distribution of overall scores and the number of districts that are in each of these. So the ones that are most notable, like EL, as an example, I know it's, but you can see the sort of middle point in 2019 was to the right and then decreasing. So in other words, you see an overall slide in particular for English language learners, Black African-American students are sort of the largest in students with disabilities. So just taking a look at all of the distributions, but overall scores were impacted those three student groups the most. Oops, wrong way. That's it.
So how will all this data be used?
Well, so, a couple of things, from condition of ed perspective, obviously something that we look at in terms of, whether it's student achievement, college enrollment, et cetera. It just gives us a measuring stick in terms of how the state's doing overall on those measures, whatever that measure may be. In terms of the performance profiles, we're required to, as a state, publish what's called a report card. And this year, because we have that waiver, it's not actually used in an accountability sense. So if you were in a priority school, in a typical year, you would have to do certain school improvement things, whatever you identified as a priority area. So while we're monitoring what districts are doing, there's no new additional schools that are sort of added to that list. So I think first step is getting the information out there. Schools have to take a look at the data themselves, and then update their school improvement plan to say, okay, if we have to use our stimulus money to accelerate learning, or we have to do a summer program, what do our sort of baseline results look like now, and how will I improve upon that? And hopefully those.
How to drive any changes within the Department of Ed? Does it lead to new programs that the department offers, new supports, changes in supports?
So I don't really handle the support end, but certainly we work closely with the school improvement team. Right now they're working on putting together the network to support schools, which largely has been the AEAs. But this information would be used during those reviews, and as well as from a compliance perspective. How does that differentiated accountability system look for a particular school or district?
And sorry, I walked in on half of it, but financially, from the department, the percentage of the funds that we have, 20% has to be used to address some of this as well. So things that we learn can be addressed through that mechanism also.
Okay.
It's
good.
required to be. Yeah.
So schools were held harmless this year as far as the ratings were concerned. And so if you were a school in need of assistance, or whatever the current term is, you were still a school in need of assistance. And I suppose that there wasn't a whole lot of improvement across the state last year with the numbers. Some schools went up a little bit, some schools went down a little bit.
Right.
Was there a dramatic shift at all? Were there any outliers that this school really did well compared to other schools, and this school did worse in comparison with other schools? Did you get down to that type of fine tuning as far as identifying the outliers. It'd be interesting. I don't want to know the names of the schools, but it'd be interesting to know what if there were schools that did well comparably with the times, and some that didn't do well comparably. What do they do differently, if anything? It'd be interesting.
I think just generally, those that were in person had more in-learning options fared better. We don't have a ton of data on how much time, but being out of the classroom, learning from home, while it was necessary, had its own challenges too. The last thing I'll just point out about this website is if you want to take a look at these learning measures, you can download all this data and do your own analysis.
That sounds like so much fun.
I'm gonna go home.
From the
I know, right?
schools I know, just check on the ratings and stuff.
Yeah.
I was looking through the condition of education report. And one of the things that I'm super interested in is the amount of people enrolled in computer science classes. And one of the things that popped out to me was the percent of, first of all, there's a super low percentage of people enrolled in computer science, only 10%.
Yep.
When in reality, a majority of our jobs, we're gonna have to have really high computer science skills to be able to get into, to have pay bonuses and to be able to even function in our roles. And hopefully that learning will come later, but one of the other things is only 3% of females took high school computer science classes versus 16%. And oftentimes in my own computer science classes, I'm the only girl in there, in a class of 25 students. And so I think this is a really, really big issue. If you look at it from an economic standpoint, the people who take computer science classes will get more pay raises because they have those skills. But also technology is changing our world, and the people creating the solutions are the ones who have the skills to do it. If only 3% of girls have the skills to do it versus almost 1/5 of guys, what solutions are being made and who are they being made for? So what's the department doing to address this gap? I know that there's simply changing the names of courses. I think that what's really great for girls is the Project Lead the Way courses have been amazing, but I think it's a big issue, and I think that it was the governor's priority at some point in time. But I haven't seen what's been changed.
And there's some expectations, some requirements that'll be coming to effect soon. And I think the people who cover that area have stepped out. But there is a report and requirements for schools to offer that, and that does not fully go into effect until I think it's the next year. Once that does happen, I think you'll see a change. And then there's a few other initiatives to align with that, just to help prioritize it. There's some possibilities of some funding and different ways to kind of, to your point, really promote more of those options within the schools to a broader scope of students.
Yeah.
It's still at this time not, directed to be, it's an offering requirement versus who has to take it.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking into that, the extracurricular opportunities available as well, a lot of those completely push females out of them. The places you visit on them, they are all male companies. The only woman working there is the secretary. You're one of 4 girls on the team, pushed to the side. And this isn't just my own experience, and experience of students within my own school who participate in those activities and other students that I've met through the competitions that we've been to with those STEM things. So I think that extracurricular opportunities, like you were talking with the teachers as well, they're very, very important in determining career paths. So I don't know what you could do for that, but it's huge.
Hannah, I would just add, I know that the legislature, they've talked about requiring every school to do it, and it just doesn't pass the legislature. They've had conversations about it for years on that. But as Dr. Lebo said, there is a pot of money, right, where schools can get some of those funding to actually put in the classes and get the right talent to come to the school and put those classes in place, right?
Correct. Yes.
Do these reports help us understand, define, or figure out any quantitative shortfalls compared to benchmarks from academic performance and achievement from March of 20 through now? I apologize if I missed something or didn't find it in this material, but do we have any data on that?
I didn't, I mean, the closest in terms of like national comparison information is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. So that's sort of it's given every 2 years. They're getting ready to gear up and do it again this spring, assuming you know that there aren't any hiccups, but it was canceled last year for obvious reasons. But that's the closest we have in terms of a national measuring stick to say, how does Iowa compare in 8th grade mathematics compared to other states overall? And certainly can come back and focus on that if that's an area. I didn't put it in here. The last time we had those data were from 2019.
Okay.
Is there a breakdown for the advanced placement courses? I couldn't find it between races and socioeconomic statuses within here.
I don't know if we have it in there. We certainly have the information, and you are going to see some differences, definitely. Even when we look at the high school course data that I showed you, you know, in terms of Algebra 2, when we start, you know, disaggregating that information, you do see some notable differences in the percent of Hispanic students that are taking higher level math, et cetera. So if it's not in there, happy to share either the AP info or the other data. The other data actually is in there.
Okay.
Do we know anything about, I mean, because I know that's, I mean, obviously it's been an issue for years, but I mean, I remember when we had the students come talk to us and they were talking about how minority students aren't really encouraged down those paths to take AP courses or maybe even discouraged from taking them. I mean, how do we ensure that they feel, you know, welcome in that environment? Because you can't learn if you're not welcome in that environment, and that you're encouraged. I mean, if you have the aptitude for it, then there's no reason for discouraging a student from taking it. So I just, obviously this is not a J question, but I mean, is there anything that schools that we know schools are doing or anything that they're changing? And I don't know if it's the teachers that are discouraging them or what, but is there anything that the department can do to respond to that or to assist school districts in kind of ensuring that they are really encouraging students, all students who have the aptitude for it to take those advanced courses or anything like that?
I mean, so from my role, I mean, I think getting the information out there, sharing it, talking about it, you know, putting a spotlight on it, so that folks recognizing there are huge differences. So then to your point, Brooke, like what are the barriers in making a change? I think that's, you know, that's obviously much harder to work through, but, you know, I think getting the information out there and building awareness around this as a problem is sort of the first step.
And Jeremy, correct me if I'm saying this wrong. I do think there's also some districts that have sort of a philosophical difference on what they push on AP versus concurrent enrollment. So different districts prioritize different things for different reasons. I know there's some that don't offer it at all because it takes you forward in a different path to the concurrent enrollment options. And sometimes it's a staffing question, but I think you start with that philosophical priority and then, but in either scenario, they being encouraged for different populations to ensure that we're getting all kids to the path that they need to move forward. Is that fairly accurate?
That's exactly right. And one of the things that we're doing right is promoting individualized current academic planning, ensuring that that's robust at school level. So to the extent students know what they want to do in life, they're more likely to take the coursework that leads them to that goal. So we're trying to expand those experiences and expand work-based learning experiences. So students, again, have this goal, then they know they need to take the math course to get to the
place that they want to be. And so we were, very fortunate to have really high rates of concurrent enrollment course taking. But in terms of direct department action, that the focus on middle school and on the career and academic planning process is a holistic process, and work-based learning experiences are tangible steps we're taking to increase that course taking.
And the concurrent enrollment, is that, are a lot of minority students enrolled in concurrent enrollment?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have our joint enrollment report in March where we break that down in great detail. We haven't put that report together yet. I think Allison is currently working on it. So at the next board meeting, we'll break all that out for you in a great deal of detail.
Okay.
Talk about how that looks.
Okay, thank you.
So is there a group within the department? I know that there was an equity coordinator appointed, but is there a workforce task force and group within the department that is even working on equity? I mean, I know that it should be integrated with everything. It should be a lens that you look through within every area. But what work is being done in that aspect? Because sometimes it seems like it stopped. Within my district, it stopped. Has it stopped at the department?
So, and I think Mindy could come in and talk a little bit about that. There's kind of two priorities. There's kind of looking at our internal work and then how some individuals that are part of that team work with the external work. I'm happy to have her come and bring a, give an update, but there's kind of two different questions. So the work hasn't stopped. It's trying to address what are the priorities in terms of what we're trying to make sure we're managing appropriately. There has been some time spent just on working our internal systems on its own, but there are still required trainings and communications externally with districts that they have to participate in through the department. But I'd have to have one of them give you an update on that for some more details, which we certainly can.
Have her come there.
Maybe that could be our next work session.
Yeah,
That'd
that'd be a good work session.
be a good one. It fits one of our priorities.
Yeah. Oh,
And then I had one more thing that I had looked at, the disproportionality between, it's on page 190 within special education seems huge.
Yes.
What's being done to address that? Specifically within African American, Native American, multiracial, and Hispanic students.
I don't know then for me, is that, just placement? Barb Guy would really be the right person. Certainly, so we have to report those data from a state perspective. And there are ramifications for disproportionality as a state, but then there are also districts as well. But she's much closer to what's happening with disproportionality. But, a district can, just like within the Iowa School Performance Profiles, they can get identified and then have to be put on a corrective action plan, et cetera. But more specifics would be the right person to answer that. So sorry.
That's a good.
But it is definitely an area of concern, not just with.
Is it something that the department is working on? or-
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the point of those, just that data. So they have a separate report that they create called SPP APR, but basically focuses on not just that measure, but a bunch of different measures, whether it's suspension and expulsion of students of color at disproportionate rates, or in this particular case, placement at disproportionate rates. It's a state requirement. And again, there are, we as a state are held accountable, but districts are also held accountable.
I think as an example, if we go back to our beginning journey with Davenport, that was one of the flags that got us there. So through that kind of accreditation review, what we might see on a desk audit might get a flag, gets our attention, and then the follow-up determines kind of what happens next.
But to Director Lebo's point, I mean, it was over-identification was sort of what
Yeah,
started that process.
I mean, just from my perspective, it looks like it's a huge statewide issue. Like it doesn't, I mean, it's not broken down by school districts. It looks like it's not just one school. It's
absolutely.
the whole state.
Absolutely. Other questions? I said I'd take less than an hour and I took an hour, so I would really appreciate the time and it was informative.
Thank you. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
Good afternoon. I guess for next, we'll talk about the condition of community colleges report. So follow an hour of data with more data.
So exciting. Did we do this in this?
Good. So
Bring this up.
After lunch.
I'm Jeremy Varner. I head up the Division of Community Colleges and Workforce Prep, and I have with me today Allison Jepson, who coordinated this project for Division. She's going to deliver the bulk of this PowerPoint. She's going to do a quick setup, and then Vladimir Basis, who is our subject matter expert on all things community college MIS. So you asked the really technical data questions. He'll be here to help us solve that. So yeah, jumping in, you all see this report each year. This is our flagship report on everything community colleges. It has detailed information on fiscal year. So this is 2020 and 2021. Keep in mind that this past year was a bit of an anomaly in terms of we had a pandemic. So make sure you look at this information in that lens. I talked to you in a month or two ago about fall enrollment. That's our freshest data. So you saw, we talked about online enrollment and the big kind of shift back from the prior fall. Some of these trends have evolved since then, but this is our most comprehensive data. There's only so much that we report in the fall. This is our comprehensive annual report. It lags a little bit, but it gives you, I think, pretty detailed information. The main thing I'd encourage you to do is just make sure you look at it with the appropriate lens. Again, this is our flagship report on Iowa's largest system of higher education. Extensive information about credit and non-credit enrollment, credit and non-credit programs, student success, HR, financials, the whole gamut of what our institutions do. You'll see quite a lot going on in this report, and Allison will take you down the cut, including all of the things community colleges are doing to close the skills gap and prepare Iowans for rewarding careers. The report also includes things beyond just data and includes stories. So our communications team does a great job in working with us to, to explain what this stuff looks like on the ground. It's one thing to just have tables, numbers. We also like to explain what those programs are, what they really look like, because all these numbers are students, they're real people. And so we want to put a face on those people. So you'll see that these vignettes kind of embedded throughout the report. The other thing I'd note is that every picture that's in this report is from an Iowa community college. These are our students. These are not stock photos. So everyone there are real students. Our team does a great job of that, and the community colleges provide us with those. So we were very appreciative to the teams for supporting us on that. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to Allison to talk through the report, is this static report, which is glossy and attractive and whatnot, is supplemented by very extensive online information. So all the data that you might want, you can export and download, process, play with, in all the ways that you might want. There are data visualization tools as well. So you can turn on and off filters, select certain institutions, select certain programs. You want to know the outcomes of students in welding programs at Iowa Valley Community College or whatever. You can see all of those things. And learn quite a lot, and answer your own questions. Of course, you're always welcome to send the questions to us, and we'll help you through this too. But do want to point that out because those are really useful tools beyond this kind of high-level summative information that's in the report. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Allison.
Thank you. And thank you for having us here today. I'm going to take you through some of the information that you'll find in this report. We'll start off with credit enrollment. So during academic year 21, so that's fall 2020 to spring 2021 that this report covers, students were enrolled in credit, 116,979 students were enrolled in credit courses. That's a decline of 7.9% for the previous year. Again, keeping in mind that this is the pandemic year that we're covering. Though there was a decrease in enrollment in credit hours per student actually did increase 0.9%. Most students enrolled in credit coursework are working towards certificates, diplomas, or an associate's degree, or are taking courses to transfer to another college or university. However, some students take credit courses for personal reasons or for upskilling purposes. So over half of all community college students are female at 57.1%. The average age of Iowa's community college students is slightly younger than the national average. So Iowa community college students under the age of 18 account for 33.3% of total student population. Iowa's community colleges have also become become increasingly diverse. In 2007, only 10.6% were racial or ethnic minorities. Today, it is 23.4%, which is a bit of a drop from last year, which was an all-time high at 23.7%. But trends from the current academic year point toward that number going back up again. So joint enrollment of high school students decreased 8.8% in academic year 21 to 47,262 students. But even with this drop in enrollment, trends suggest that joint enrollment is back on an upward trend for the current academic year. Joint enrollment has increased approximately 124.5% since 2004. That's an average annual increase of about 4.9%.
Allison,
Yes.
where would community colleges be without high school students? Seriously.
It is a big part of what's going on now. Yes. I mean, I can't speak to some of the bigger trends there, but it is a big part of what the community colleges do now is educating our, getting our high school students a leg up that way, and getting them that connection to earlier access to classes and more and other opportunities. So there are a lot of connections now that happen between the high schools and community colleges.
Does that number include the amount of high school students who signed up for a class and then dropped it?
Vlad, do you know?
Yeah, no. The numbers reported to the management information system only include students who actually stayed for longer than 2 weeks dropout period. So those who initially signed up and dropped are not included.
Okay. Thank you, Vlad.
So going back to my question. Where would community colleges be without high school students?
Right, there's no question that we have a very integrated system, and we have since the very inception of community colleges now. Mason City Junior College, 1918, built off Mason City School Districts, right? These systems have always been wedded together, and I think in Iowa, more integrated than probably any other system in the country. Currently, in terms of headcount, it's probably by college, it varies a bit, but usually 40 to 50% of the headcount enrollment. Now, in terms of credit hours, it's quite a bit less. Students in high school are taking 2 to 3 classes on average, right? They're not full-time students. So in terms of credit hours, you're probably looking at more like a quarter. So in terms of FTE, you're about a quarter of credit hours. We can get the exact number. A joint enrollment report in March will break this down in a great deal of detail, but that's generally what we see. So it's a sizable part of the delivery system, but it also means shorter time to degree. Students are completing earlier and they've got a leg up. So it's a big part of what we do.
And just to add to Jeremy, to be explicit too, right? I mean, I was just talking about rural districts and, I think the opportunities that students have obviously are much more expanded by that partnership that they might not have if they were standalone as a district, right? They wouldn't be able to.
Well, that's the flip question is where would high schools be without community college enrollment? That's the other part of it. I know being in Iowa Falls where we have, Ellsworth College and Iowa Valley services our area. It would be nice to have like a DMAC next door to us in Iowa Valley. Nothing wrong with Iowa Valley, but you're talking about expanded opportunities for students. It's huge. So I mean, it's a partnership, but it's a two-sided coin.
Absolutely. And yeah, speaking to that more, I mean, it is part of that opportunity going back and forth there. And one of the things that we've seen increase a lot is the number of awards conferred to students. So this year alone, there was a 23.7% increase in awards conferred to students. That was at 1,122. And I think that will continue to grow with current efforts. Online enrollment.
The community colleges do workforce training. I mean, those are significant numbers as well. And those are not necessarily high school. They're not high school students. They're customized training for business and industry. They're adult literacy. They're adult basic education. those are also things the community colleges excel at.
I'm well aware of that.
So one of the big stories this year was online enrollment, or for this academic year. So when it comes to online enrollment, just to clarify the definition, an online course is defined as one that is delivered entirely online, not a hybrid course. So over half of all community college students, that's 65.8%, took at least one online course during that academic year of 21. The number of students taking online courses increased 10.6% to 77,015 students, and semester hours online increased 45.4% to 749,663 hours. So overall, online credit enrollment has grown an average of 6.3% annually since 2007. Of course, this big leap was, of course, due to most of the classes being online. But this is something that we are seeing is more people wanting to having different ways to access our courses. So we will continue to see probably changes in those numbers and an upward trend. So credit awards, these are degrees, diplomas, and certificates. And when we talk about the Future Ready Iowa goal of 70% of Iowa's population having post-secondary education or training by 2025, these are the numbers that get us towards that goal. So between the last academic year and academic year 21, there was a 6.6% increase in credit awards. As for the kinds of awards earned, 28.2% of all awards were in Associate of Applied Science, followed closely by an Associate of Arts degree at 28%. Credit programs lead to certificate, diploma, or associate's degrees and are designed to prepare students for immediate employment in occupations requiring less than a 4-year degree or for transfer to a 4-year bachelor's degree institution. Of the 1,330 award options offered statewide in CTE programs in particular, the majority were in health science, business management and administration, and law, public safety, and security. And as you can see here, one of the most notable stats is that the percentage of students in CTE and arts and sciences programs are each about half of the number of students who are declared no program of study, which has been a trend now for several years in a row. And most of these students who declared no program of study are jointly enrolled students. Non-credit programs often lead to industry recognized certifications that hold labor market value. When stackable, these credentials help students progress in their careers with entry and exit points and result in earning ascending credentials along the way. And these programs include courses in personal and academics basic skill development that prepare students to enter the workforce, special interest in technical courses directly related to industry-based opportunities. Enrollment decreased 3.3% in the previous year, and the number of courses dropped 1.3%. But the largest category of non-credit courses are designed to enhance employability or academic success of students. Iowa's adult education and literacy programs provide non-credit instruction in adult basic education, adult secondary education, English as a second language, and other training to help adult learners improve their education and skills levels to meet employer demands and secure living wage jobs. In academic year 21, there were 10,676 students who participated in adult education and literacy programs, and this was down 22.9% from the previous academic year, again, largely due to some of the classes being online and some of the impact of the pandemic. The 3 highest barriers to employment as self-identified by participants upon entry into the programs were being an English language learner and having low literacy or experiencing cultural barriers, being low income, or being a single parent. And these, the people who answered the survey could answer more than one, but those were the top 3 mentioned. So Paula Nissen will speak more after this presentation about the workforce training and economic development funds that supplement the programs noted here. But we wanted to showcase some of the successes of a couple of these programs. So the Gaap tuition assistance program provides funding to the community colleges for need-based tuition assistance to applicants who complete approved continuing education non-credit certification programs. In academic year 21, 977 applicants were approved for assistance, 638 completed the program, and 476 earned a third-party credential. And some participants do take more than a year to conclude that program. So that's why you see it's a slightly lower number for people who have completed and earned a credential. The PACE program provides funding to Iowa's community colleges for the development of academic and employment training programs. In academic year 21, 2,697 applicants met eligibility requirements for the program. By the end of academic year 21, 882 received an award through credit programs, and 728 of those were in CTE programs. 598 completed non-credit programs. Again, 512 were in CTE local awards. 425 earned an industry credential, and 545 earned a third-party credential. As part of these programs, we wanted to recognize the work of the Iowa Intermediary Network, which provides student worksite experiences, including internships, job shadowing, student tours, career fairs, mock interviews, financial literacy fairs, and other local, regional, and statewide events. There are also included virtual experiences this past year, which provided equal access to more of these work-based learning programs while virtual learning was happening. So these experiences were delivered through the 15 regional intermediary networks, which serve as a one-stop contact points for the respective regions to provide information on work-based learning opportunities and better prepare students to make informed post-secondary and career decisions. In academic year 21, 71,242 students and 1,833 educators were served. So the stats shown here are for the Industrial New Jobs Training Act, Iowa Jobs Training Act, and Apprenticeship Training Act, which are offered through the community colleges, but are funded and managed through the Iowa Economic Development Authority. It should be noted that these figures in the section represent FY20 data, as FY21 data was not yet available from IEDA. But they do show the new jobs pledged and open agreements, as well as new jobs that were funded through these programs. So student success is measured in a variety of ways. These include graduating from the community college with a degree or diploma, transferring to a four-year college or university, or simply improving one's job skills. So data in this section was from a cohort that first enrolled in Iowa's community colleges in the fall semester of 2018 as full-time students. So tuition is the amount that colleges charge for courses, and mandatory fees may be charged for access to certain activities or services. The sum of this is commonly referred to as cost of enrollment. The Iowa Code states that tuition for residents of Iowa shall not exceed the lowest tuition rate per semester or the equivalent charged by an institution of higher education under the Iowa Board of Regents for a full-time resident student. The cost of enrollment increased 2.5% from the previous year. And according to IPED's data, the average in-district total cost of enrollment during academic year 20 was $5,462.56, which places Iowa in the 88th percentile. So the national average by comparison was $4,222.66.
So we charge more than the national average?
Yes, we do. From the financial aid side, and analyzing the sources of financial aid and received by community college students for academic year 21, data from the Iowa College Student Aid Commission shows that federal student aid was $222.1 million, state aid was $5.5 million, institutional aid was $24.3 million, and other aid was $12.4 million. So the breakdown of those percentages are 84% from federal, was from the federal government, 9.2 from community colleges themselves, 4.7 from other sources, and 2.1% from the state.
Allison, do you have a comparison of what Iowa state contribution is compared to other states across the country?
I don't have that information on hand, but do you know where that information might be obtained as far as a comparison of a breakdown for financial aid? I think of Iowa College Aid would probably have more of that direct information. And they would probably have those comparisons directly. We just have received the information for Iowa from them, but that is a comparison that would be interesting to look into for that. As far as
it's true anymore, but in the past, for a long time, Iowa was the only state that didn't provide state funds for adult basic education. That changed a few years ago. And so now I don't know where we compare, if we're still low in terms of what the state provides for that compared to other states, but apparently we didn't value adult basic education very much.
Well, I'm just thinking it's kind of a yin yang type of thing, is that we charge what, 88th percentile as far as
What we do.
per credit hour or whatever that is. And I'm guessing, I don't know, that probably our state funding is probably well below the national average. So that's,
Well, we are at the same time for non-credit education, not only adult literacy, as we know from our colleagues from other states, provide unprecedented financial support for specific CP programs for our students from the state funds, basically. So those programs like Gaap or PACE, they do something that some other states simply
Don't know, yeah.
Yes, but as far as that other information, it is interesting to see those numbers. But Iowa College Age supplies us with this information, but that's something we can look into more. It's just our comparisons nationally.
just guessing.
One thing I would add, John, is we used to always have this community college revenue by source, at least for Fund 1 is a chart. So you can see that where the funding is coming into our institutions and the relationship between the funds. I don't know if that's still on the report or not, but if not, we could send it to you. I know we generated, but your assumption about how these things work is generally correct. Community colleges also receive some property tax revenue, but it's a tiny fraction of what some other states generate.
So going towards default rates for students and for the FY17 cohort, it was 16.1%. For FY18, we saw a drop to 11.4%, but this could be due to the freeze on federal student loan payments. So we'll see what that is moving forward with that default rate. And the largest scholarship, as you can see here, is the last dollar scholarships, are the biggest ones throughout the state. So community impact. Each year, every community college provides a community impact story about how students, the administration, or programs have made a difference at the college or in the broader community. So I just wanted to highlight some of the programs here. So included here are Hawkeye Community College's Ignite program, which is to support advanced manufacturing skills development. And that program provides virtual learning as well as on-site experience for high school students and adults. Western Iowa Tech's program, which their technology initiatives to support free Wi-Fi virtual classrooms, technology training, and laptops for all students, which they've done for the last 8 years, which of course became especially important as if there was a turn to virtual learning. And Iowa Western Community College, which has a partnership with Council Bluffs Community School District to earn simultaneous high school diploma and associate's degrees, and that is at no cost to the students or parents for that program. Some of the special features you'll see, thanks to our communications staff, are stories about the Iowa Intermediary Network live events, which I spoke about earlier, and the turn to those events as there has been a return to more in-person events this current year, but those virtual events have really increased access and options for work-based learning. The Ideal Initiative, which is part of reaching more adult learners across Iowa to meet student demands and regional needs through virtual learning. And Iowa Student Outcomes, which is a project across the agencies to provide more direct information about the really high quality and nationally recognized reports about student outcomes data from our state. So that website contains some great information. I can answer a lot of the questions too, because Iowa Student Aid is one of our partners there, as well as Iowa Workforce Development, the Board of Regents, and education agencies as well, all provide information for that page. And that provides some great crossover information and provides an easy one-stop shop for all of that data. So in conclusion, our community colleges run on 5 principles: open access, affordable education, economic growth, community support, and value to the state. So we're really proud to work with those institutions and provide this information to you today. Are there any other questions that we can answer for you?
I have a question about community colleges and the response to the statewide work shortage for healthcare workers, especially CNAs and nurses. So RAs, RNs, yes, that's what I'm looking for. So my husband was, he's a CNA, and so he was DMAC, and so he completed his first year, but then it just got too challenging with kids and everything. And so I felt like they made it more challenging for him to go through because it used to be that you complete your first year of the RN, which is a 2-year program. And then if you stopped after the first year, you could just take the test and become an LPN. But now you have to stop and then start the whole thing over again, take another year of coursework to become an LPN. And it was just like, oh my gosh, we were like, we can't do that. So, so I'm just wondering, and I mean, they also have a thing where you have to like, if you fail a course, then obviously you can't continue. So you have to sit out, and sometimes it's for a year, you have to sit out until there's a space available. So it just doesn't seem like it's very, I don't know, productive in terms of like training people out to get into the workforce. If you're like, oh, you have to sit out for a year, we don't know when you're going to be available. So other people just, a lot of people just leave and just go find other jobs because they have a family maybe. And it seems like it's more geared towards like 18-year-olds who have no family or anything like that. So for, people wanting to re-enter the workforce or upskill or whatever, it doesn't seem like. So I'm just wondering in general, how are community colleges kind of responding to that?
Yeah, maybe I can take that one. So there's a lot going on, right? Responding to the concerns in the allied health fields. There's no question that we have a number of really important sectors, the economy, that are really struggling to find skilled labor. And certainly our healthcare facilities are near the top of that list, right? So there's a lot going on. Our institutions are responding by in a variety of ways. We do have programs that are waitlisted for ADM programs, right? Meaning, it's competitive to get into it to some extent, right? It's a challenge. And so there are more students interested than there is space to do it. And there are lots of challenges in growing these programs in terms of accreditation requirements and clinical sites, right? Availability, how much can be done by simulation. I don't claim to understand all of that. We do have an expert on staff who tracks the allied health program issues, but I can say that we've been very focused on, the governor has certainly, the Department of Ed, we had gear funds that were committed to expanding short-term job training, to expanding the Gaap tuition assistance program to make non-credit job training free. And you see that reflected in increased training for CNAs. So we had Iowa Western commit to training 100 CNAs, and we had a couple other colleges replicate that, but also in other areas like CDL training truck drivers, right? So basically making that training free to folks to ramp up the training for those credentials. I can't speak to LPN directly, but it's something we can follow up on, look into, and I'd be really interested in your experience, the Institute. If you want to send me like an email about what the deal is, I can dig into.
Oh, I will. And I have another friend who experienced a similar thing. I think from personal experience, it's kind of like, I feel like you go to a community college because they say that they're there to help, people who are maybe adult education, who are trying to re-enter the work or trying to skill up or whatever. And so as a family, with kids, and I was pregnant with my second, I think that just, we didn't really know where we were getting ourselves into. It was like, become a nurse. And so, he's a CNA, he loves it. He works at hospice, but we would ultimately like for him to continue, but it's just so stressful that I just can't see him doing that right now. And I just felt like there were no supports there, right? Especially, and it's just, he missed something because he had the flu, and it was like, and they were going to fail him. And then if he hadn't had me as a huge advocate, because I was like, oh, hell no. I was like, I was like, no, you need to email your teacher right now and tell them that you have a doctor's note. Like the entire family had no, you don't, but I just feel like sometimes they just get so, well, we have 5 other people who will replace you. And it's like, it shouldn't be like that, right? You should try to help the people that are already in there. So I just felt like the supports weren't there or whatever. And maybe it's more geared towards, like I said, 18-year-olds who have a family and don't have priorities and things like that. So
how many nursing programs around the state offer part-time programs? Because I know
DMAC does.
Valley, it used to be it was only a full-time program period. If you were, if you had a job too bad, you had to quit it in order to go to, you know how many now have part-time programs?
Yeah, DMAC does, but it's only offered in the fall, like every couple of years.
Oh.
So like, if you don't get in on that one, you have to wait maybe like 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
So I think Iowa Valley started a part-time one.
Yeah, and there's a ton of interest in doing more of this, right? So, but you have to find the qualified nursing faculty, you have to have facilities, you have to have the clinical sites, and it's a challenge to do all of that.
Yeah. I feel like it should be something that they're focusing on, because I feel like there's been, it hasn't, this is not a new thing, right? But now it's just, I feel like the pandemic, like nurses are leaving in record numbers now. So I'm like, what are you doing? I would like to hear DMAC say they're doing something, but I haven't heard them saying they're doing anything, so.
Yeah, I'll report something back to the board, particularly about what DMAC is doing, but also the sector as a whole with regard to allied health.
Right, thank you. And I'll email you.
I have a question. So for students who are dual enrolled, do we track those who might go on then to an Iowa college or university and graduate? And if they have the ability to graduate early?
Yeah, so yes, we track students through the National Student Clearinghouse. So after a student leaves a community college after whatever amount of time, whether they leave early or they complete an associate degree and then transfer, we follow them into higher ed institutions nationally. So, you know, whether that be out east or within state, public, private, whatever it is. So we have data on the success of those students and where they go. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, I'm just curious what percentage of those who are in high school who also get college credits while they're in high school then move on to an Iowa college or university and graduate from there, and if they graduate early?
Yeah, they absolutely do
The
graduate.
report that we just published is precisely about that.
Yep.
We had a research that tracked high school students in two categories, those with joint enrollment experience in detail versus those without joint enrollment experience, tracked them to all institutions that they entered or did not enter in comparison with people without joint enrollment experience, time to degree, number of credits, if that played any specific role. It's on our site. It's published as a research only about a couple of months ago, I believe, Jeremy.
Yeah, it does reduce time to degree. I know that. We'll send the report to you. So we'll flag that in the notes here and we'll get that. We'll send that to the whole group here.
Thanks.
In my experience, a lot of students are learning more about the opportunity to get your associate degree while you're in high school. Well, I do believe that taking more DMAT classes than AP classes, if you're opting in for an advanced course, I think that there's benefits to both of them. Like taking DMAT classes, you get to work at your own pace, you get to learn the management of those courses. But you don't necessarily build the community that you would in AP courses, but there's a lot more option and accessibility of those DMAT courses, which I think is super duper important. But I think that there could be an increase in awareness of the certificates that you could get as a high schooler. Because I think that having the option to do joint enrollment as a high schooler is amazing. Getting your like core classes that you would have to take if you choose to attend college out of the way makes you more room for you to take classes that you would enjoy to explore your career paths there. And also the ability to get a certificate before you even graduate high school, even if it isn't your associate degree, makes you eligible for more internships and jobs that students I think are already taking advantage of. Yeah. I do think that there's a component that could be improved about how to make the connections, because in one of my classes, I have students who are high schoolers, I have part-time moms that like who are working a part-time job and they're new moms, and I have like people who have really high up jobs in John Deere, all in the same class. And imagine the environment that you'd have if you connected all of these learners in one classroom and the stuff that you could learn from each other. I think that that would be really cool. But the virtual classrooms don't always allow for that. It does allow for more freedom though, and less time, but I think that's something to be aware of too.
Absolutely. Any other questions we can answer for you today? Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Should probably go ahead and break and then have Paula. Okay.
Yes.
Do you mind waiting till after a break, Paula?
No problem.
Okay.
Okay.
I think it might be good to take our break now and then come back and we'll start back off with
Do
Paula.
you want to come back in 5 or 10? What do you think?
45, whatever hour, 2:45.
45.
2:45, we'll be back.
I think, is this? still
David, we're
recording?
going to adjourn until 2:45.